COVID-19 certainly dominated the headlines in 2020, but it turns out it was actually a pretty active year for other news. From cyber attacks to UFOs and also calls to change the name of McCarran International Airport. Here's 13 Investigates reporter Joe Bartels with an update on the most watched 13 Investigate stories of 2020.
2020 was eventful to say the least. Unexplained flying objects fascinated people across the country as well as on KTNV.com. It kicks off our 13 Investigates most watched stories of 2020.
We're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 miles from the west.
In April, the Pentagon released perhaps the clearest images yet of a possible UFO in the skies above Earth.
Fleet of them. Look on the ASA.
The video was taken from U.S. warplanes using an infrared camera.
Well, if there's look at that thing.
Fighter pilots can be heard trying to figure out what exactly they're seeing.
Until you get some really good evidence, I think you should just be a little bit skeptical. I'm looking for aliens. That's what the SETI Institute does. But we don't claim to have found them yet.
Dr. Seth Shostak is the lead astronomer at the SETI Institute, a not-for-profit research organization that has studied the stars and UFOs for years. He says the videos, which date back to 2004 and were first released by a third party around 2017. In 2020, the government confirmed the video, but it leaves many more questions about how much or exactly how little we know.
I think the bottom line is really quite simple. You see a piece of evidence, and if there are usually several ways to explain that evidence, only one of which is UFOs.
My assessment is that they travel electronically. They travel through electromagnetic fields. That's how they can get the speed. That's how they can fly at light speed.
George Harris is a UFO expert and owns the Alien Research Center located near the famed Area 51, about 2 hours north of the Las Vegas Valley.
It was very hard for the government to admit that there were credible sightings. The sad thing is that this has been happening since the late 50s, but no one ever talks about it.
The developments got the attention of former Nevada Senator Harry Reid. In April, he tweeted, quote, "I'm glad the Pentagon is finally releasing this footage, but it only scratches the surface of research and materials available." In March, unexplained outages of slot machines and other computer systems hit Binion's and the Four Queens in downtown Las Vegas. Both casinos share common ownership. For several days, rows of slot machines appeared to be out of service. Cybersecurity experts say prolonged outages had the markings of a cyber attack.
A cybersecurity analyst and researcher has to be right 100% of the time. A cyber criminal only has to get lucky once.
Cybersecurity expert Shannon Wilkinson says 2020 saw massive attacks on hospitals, healthcare networks, and even schools. In August, the Clark County School District acknowledged hackers targeted sensitive student data, including social security numbers, names, and addresses.
And we're seeing that particularly with the school districts that were heavily hit, especially going virtual this year. Ransomware operators really knew where to hit hard to cause the most disruption and hit vital systems.
Wilkinson says a lot of the attacks originate outside the U.S. in an effort to blackmail, extort money, or steal intellectual property.
A lot of ransomware and data breach groups coming out of Eastern Europe. There's also Iran, China, North Korea, kind of state-sponsored hacking organizations.
The city of Las Vegas revealing on average their computer systems are attacked more than 250,000 times each month on average.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot!
Racial unrest in Las Vegas took over streets beginning in May as people chanted for change and demanded to be heard.
Don't shoot!
It came after a series of high-profile killings of black people by police across the country. The unrest revived a new effort to scrub former Nevada Senator Patrick McCarran's name from the Las Vegas airport.
We're a multicultural, multi-ethnic city, and the fact that our airport was named after a racist and anti-Semite and other things is just unacceptable.
Clark County Commissioner Tick Segerblum says he plans to bring the name change up before the county commission in early 2021. Senator Patrick McCarran, known simply as Pat, served in the U.S. Senate from 1933 until his death in 1954. He was considered instrumental in establishing the U.S. Air Force as a separate branch of the military and for largely shaping the U.S. air industry as it stands today. He was also a hardliner anti-communist, and some say left a legacy of racism, xenophobia, and anti-Semitism.
But to have the first thing when you come to Nevada the McCarran Airport. When you look at his history, that's just unacceptable.
13 Investigates spoke to critics opposed to stripping the airport of the McCarran legacy. They say McCarran was a critical part of history. A name change would require a 4-person majority vote by the Clark County Commission. Now, if there was a name change, there was a cost associated of about $2 million. That would be anything to change from letterhead to logos, graphics, really anything bearing the McCarran name. Tick Siegerblum says that he would raise that money privately, no need for taxpayer funds. Joe Bartels, 13 Investigates.